I was installing the safety net on my brand new trampoline when I heard the sharp click of heels on concrete behind me. The sound alone made my stomach drop because I knew exactly who it was before I even turned around. Sharon Whitmore, president of the Meadowbrook Springs Homeowners Association in Henderson, Nevada, stood at the edge of my driveway with her arms crossed and that signature look of disgust plastered across her face, like I had just committed a felony in broad daylight. "That needs to come down immediately," she said, her voice dripping with the kind of authority that made my blood boil. I had been living in this neighborhood for exactly 3 months, and this was the 5th time Sharon had shown up at my house to complain about something. First, it was my mailbox being the wrong shade of black. Then it was my grass being a 1/4 inch too long. After that, she took issue with my basketball hoop, claiming it was an eyesore, even though half the neighborhood had them. The 4th time was about my recycling bins being visible from the street on a non-collection day, which apparently violated some obscure rule buried on page 47 of the HOA handbook. "Good morning to you too, Sharon," I said, wiping the sweat from my forehead. It was early June, and the Nevada heat was already pushing 90 degrees at 10 in the morning. "What seems to be the problem now?" She pointed at the trampoline like it was a nuclear weapon. "That monstrosity violates multiple HOA regulations. It's unsightly, it's a liability, and it doesn't belong in this community. I'm going to have to write you up and fine you $500 if it's not removed within 48 hours. I took a deep breath and counted to 5 in my head. My daughter Emma had been begging me for a trampoline since we moved here from California. She was 8 years old, and making friends in a new neighborhood had been tough for her. The trampoline was supposed to be a surprise for her birthday next week, and I had spent the last 2 hours assembling the damn thing in the June heat. "Sharon, I read through the entire HOA handbook before I bought this," I said, keeping my voice as calm as possible. "There's nothing in there about trampolines. I checked specifically because I knew you'd probably have an issue with it." Her face turned red, and I could see the vein on her forehead starting to pulse. "It falls under the category of recreational equipment that negatively impacts property values and neighborhood aesthetics. Section 12, subsection 4. I had my phone in my back pocket, and I pulled up the digital copy of the HOA handbook I had saved. I scrolled to section 12, subsection 4, and read it out loud. Recreational equipment, including but not limited to basketball hoops, swing sets, and above-ground pools, must be maintained in good condition, and may not be placed in front yards or side yards visible from the street. All such equipment must be positioned in backyards when possible." I looked up at her. "My trampoline is in my backyard, Sharon, and it's brand new, so it's definitely in good condition." She sputtered for a moment, clearly not expecting me to have the actual regulation memorized. The list isn't exhaustive. The phrase "including but not limited to" means the board has discretion to determine what qualifies as recreational equipment subject to restrictions. The regulation says the equipment can't be in the front or side yard if visible from the street, I repeated. My backyard is completely fenced. You can't even see the trampoline from the street. So even if trampolines were covered under this regulation, which I don't think they are since they're not specifically listed, I'm still in compliance. Sharon's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. For a second, I thought I had actually won this argument, but then her eyes narrowed, and I knew I was in for a fight. "I'll be bringing this up at the next board meeting. In the meantime, consider this an official warning. If that trampoline is still there by the end of the week, you'll be fined." She turned on her heel and marched back down my driveway before I could respond. I watched her get into her white Lexus SUV and drive off, probably heading to harass some other poor homeowner about their lawn ornaments or paint color. I finished installing the safety net and stepped back to admire my work. The trampoline looked great, and I could already picture Emma's face when she saw it. I wasn't going to let Sharon Whitmore ruin this for her. That evening, I was making dinner when my doorbell rang. I opened it to find a Henderson police officer standing on my porch, looking uncomfortable. He was young, probably in his late 20s, with a name tag that read Officer Martinez. "Good evening, sir," he said. "I'm here because we received a complaint about a possible code violation at this address, something about an illegal structure in your backyard." My jaw dropped. "You've got to be kidding me. Sharon called the cops?" Officer Martinez shifted his weight and glanced at his notepad. "A miss. Sharon Whitmore called the non-emergency line and reported that you had erected an unsafe structure without proper permits. I'm required to follow up on these calls. Mind if I take a look?" I opened the door wider and gestured for him to come in. "Be my guest. It's a trampoline. I bought it from Walmart 3 days ago and assembled it this morning." We walked through my house and out the back door. Officer Martinez looked at the trampoline, walked around it once, and then turned back to me with a tired expression. "Sir, this is just a regular trampoline. You don't need a permit for this in Henderson. It's not a permanent structure and it doesn't require a foundation or utilities." "I know that," I said. "Sharon Whitmore is the president of our HOA, and she's been harassing me since I moved in. This is the 5th complaint she's made in 3 months, and now she's wasting police resources because she doesn't like that I bought my daughter a birthday present." Officer Martinez pulled out a small notebook and started writing. "Has Miss Whitmore come to your property multiple times?" "At least 5 times that I can count," I said. "Always to complain about something different. My mailbox, my grass, my basketball hoop, my trash cans, and now this." He nodded slowly. "And you've checked your HOA rules about the trampoline?" I read the entire handbook. There's no specific prohibition against trampolines, and even the general recreational equipment rule doesn't apply because my backyard is completely fenced and not visible from the street. Officer Martinez looked around my yard, taking note of the 6-foot privacy fence that surrounded the entire space. "I'm going to be honest with you, Mr. David Chen. Mr. Chen, this is starting to sound like harassment. If she continues to file false reports or shows up at your property making threats, you might want to consider filing a complaint yourself. The city takes false reports seriously, especially when they waste department resources." A weight lifted off my shoulders. "So you're saying I don't have to take the trampoline down?" "There's no city code violation here," he confirmed. "As for your HOA rules, that's a civil matter between you and the association, but from what you're telling me, it sounds like she's overstepping. If she keeps this up, it could constitute harassment. Document everything. Keep records of every interaction. Save any emails or letters she sends you, and if she shows up again making threats, give us a call." After Officer Martinez left, I sat down at my kitchen table and opened my laptop. I started a new document titled Sharon Whitmore Interactions and began documenting every single encounter I'd had with her since moving to Meadowbrook Springs. The mailbox incident on March 15th. The grass complaint on April 2nd. The basketball hoop on April 20th. The trash cans on May 10th. And now the trampoline on June 8th. I included dates, times, what was said, and the outcomes of each interaction. The next morning, I woke up to find a formal letter from the HOA in my mailbox. It was printed on official letterhead and signed by Sharon Whitmore in her capacity as HOA president. The letter stated that I was in violation of community standards and had 48 hours to remove the trampoline or face a $500 fine. It cited the same Section 12, subsection 4 that Sharon had mentioned yesterday, along with a vague reference to Section 3 about maintaining property values. I immediately emailed the letter to myself for documentation and then called the number listed for HOA inquiries. A woman answered on the third ring. Meadowbrook Springs HOA, this is Patricia speaking. Hi Patricia, this is David Chen from 42 Sagebrush Lane. I received a violation letter this morning about a trampoline in my backyard, and I'd like to schedule a hearing to dispute it. There was a pause. Let me pull up your file. Okay, I see the violation here. It was filed by Sharon Whitmore yesterday afternoon. You're entitled to a hearing before the board. The next meeting is scheduled for June 20th at 7 p.m. in the community center. Would you like me to add you to the agenda? Yes, please. And can you tell me who else is on the board besides Sharon? We have 5 board members total, Patricia explained. Sharon Whitmore is president, Tom Brennan is vice president, Linda Ramirez is treasurer, Marcus Johnson is secretary, and Deborah Cole is a member at large. Great. I'll see you on the 20th. I spent the next week and a half preparing for the hearing. I printed out relevant sections of the HOA handbook, took photos of my trampoline from every angle, and documented that it was completely invisible from the street. I also took photos of other recreational equipment in the neighborhood. 3 houses had basketball hoops in their driveways. 2 had elaborate swing sets visible from the street. 1 family had an above-ground pool that you could see from the sidewalk. I compiled everything into a neat presentation folder with tabs and labels. Emma's birthday party was on June 15th, 5 days before the HOA hearing. I invited her entire class from school, and 15 kids showed up to bounce on the new trampoline. The party was a massive success. Emma was so happy she cried when she saw the trampoline for the first time, and watching her and her friends play on it made every ounce of stress from dealing with Sharon worth it. Several parents stayed for the party, and they all mentioned how great the trampoline was and how they were considering getting one for their own kids. One of the dads, a guy named Mike Peterson who lived 2 streets over, pulled me aside while the kids were eating cake. Hey, I heard Sharon Whitmore has been giving you grief about this trampoline. Word travels fast, I said. Mike laughed. Sharon gives everyone grief about everything. Last year she tried to fine me because my son's skateboard ramp was too loud. The thing is in my garage, and you can only hear it if you're standing in my driveway. She actually came over with a decibel meter one afternoon. What happened? I told her to leave my property and stop harassing me. She threatened to fine me, I threatened to sue her for harassment, and she backed off. But she still gives me dirty looks every time she drives by. Mike took a sip of his beer. The problem is that most people in this neighborhood are too busy or too intimidated to fight back. Sharon has been HOA president for 6 years, and she runs it like her personal fiefdom. The other board members are either her friends or too scared to contradict her. I've got a hearing scheduled for the 20th, I told him. I'm going to fight this. Good for you, man. If you need anyone to speak on your behalf, let me know. I'm happy to tell the board about Sharon's pattern of harassment. On the evening of June 20th, I drove to the Meadowbrook Springs Community Center with my presentation folder tucked under my arm. The community center was a bland stucco building that sat at the entrance to the neighborhood, surrounded by perfectly manicured desert landscaping. I walked into the main room to find about 30 folding chairs set up facing a long table where the 5 board members sat. Sharon was in the center, naturally, with the other 4 members flanking her on either side. There were maybe a dozen other residents scattered around the room, probably there for their own issues or just curious about the proceedings. I recognized Mike Peterson sitting in the back row. He gave me a subtle thumbs up when I made eye contact. Sharon called the meeting to order at 7 sharp. The board went through some routine business first, approving the minutes from the last meeting. discussing the budget for landscaping common areas, and debating whether to repaint the community center. This took about 45 minutes, and I could feel my anxiety building with every passing second. Finally, Sharon cleared her throat and looked directly at me. Next on the agenda, we have a violation dispute filed by David Chen of 42 Sagebrush Lane. Mr. Chen has installed a trampoline in his backyard in violation of HOA regulations. Mr. Chen, you have 5 minutes to present your case. I stood up and walked to the front of the room, setting my folder on the table. Thank you for the opportunity to address the board. On June 8th, I installed a trampoline in my backyard as a birthday present for my 8-year-old daughter. The trampoline is a standard recreational model purchased from Walmart. It's positioned in my backyard, which is surrounded by a 6-foot privacy fence. It's not visible from the street or from any neighboring properties. I opened my folder and pulled out the first set of photos. These photos show the trampoline from multiple angles within my yard, and these photos were taken from the street, showing that the trampoline is completely hidden by the fence. I passed the photos to Tom Brennan, the vice president, who examined them briefly before passing them down the line. I received a violation notice citing Section 12, subsection 4 of the HOA handbook. However, that section specifically addresses recreational equipment placed in front yards or side yards visible from the street. My trampoline is in my backyard and is not visible from the street, so this regulation doesn't apply. Sharon interrupted. The regulation includes, but not limited to, which gives the board discretion to determine what equipment falls under these restrictions. I understand that, I continued, but the regulation's restrictions only apply to equipment that's visible from the street or in front yards. My trampoline meets neither of those criteria. Furthermore, trampolines aren't specifically listed in the regulation, unlike basketball hoops, swing sets, and pools, which are explicitly mentioned. I pulled out my next set of photos. I'd also like to point out that there are currently multiple pieces of recreational equipment throughout the neighborhood that are visible from the street and haven't been cited for violations. These photos show basketball hoops in driveways, swing sets visible from sidewalks, and an above-ground pool. I'm not suggesting these homeowners should be fined. I'm simply pointing out that there's no consistent enforcement of this regulation, and that my trampoline is actually more compliant than many other items in the neighborhood because it's completely hidden from public view. Marcus Johnson, the secretary, leaned forward with interest. These are good points. Sharon, do we have any documented policy about trampolines specifically? Sharon's face was turning red again. The spirit of the regulation is to maintain property values and neighborhood aesthetics. Large recreational equipment can be a liability and an eyesore. But his trampoline isn't an eyesore if no one can see it, Linda Ramirez, the treasurer, pointed out. And regarding liability, that's between him and his homeowner's insurance, not an HOA matter. I could see the momentum shifting in my favor. I'd also like to address the pattern of complaints I've received since moving to Meadowbrook Springs 3 months ago. This is the 5th time I've been cited for a violation by Miss Whitmore. In March, it was my mailbox being the wrong shade of black, even though it matched the mailboxes on either side of my property. In April, it was my grass being too long, measured at 1¼ inches when the maximum is 1½ inches. Later in April, it was my basketball hoop, which was identical to basketball hoops throughout the neighborhood. In May, it was my recycling bins being visible on a non-collection day, even though I had brought them in from the curb within the required 24-hour window. Mike Peterson stood up from the back row. I'd like to speak on this if the board allows it. Sharon looked annoyed. This isn't a formal hearing. Residents who aren't directly involved shouldn't interrupt. Tom Brennan held up his hand. Actually, Sharon, our bylaws allow any resident to speak during the open comment portion of violation disputes. Go ahead, Mike. Mike walked to the front. I've lived in Meadowbrook Springs for 9 years. Sharon Whitmore has a well-documented pattern of harassing residents over minor or non-existent violations. She did the same thing to me last year with a skateboard ramp that was inside my garage. She's done it to the Hendersons about their garden gnomes, to the Patels about their car being the wrong color, and to at least half a dozen other families that I know of. This isn't about maintaining community standards. This is about Sharon abusing her position as HOA president to bully people she doesn't like. The room erupted in murmurs. Several other residents started nodding, and one woman in the third row said loudly, "He's right. She fined us for having the wrong color curtains." Sharon banged her gavel on the table. "Order. This is completely inappropriate. We're here to discuss Mr. Chen's trampoline, not to air personal grievances." Deborah Cole, who had been silent up until now, spoke up. "Actually, Sharon, I think this is relevant. If there's a pattern of frivolous complaints, the board needs to address it. We're volunteers trying to maintain community standards, not a police state." "I second that," Linda said. "I've been on this board for 2 years, and I've noticed that a disproportionate number of violation complaints come from Sharon. Maybe we need to review our complaint process." Sharon looked like she was about to explode. "I am doing my job as president. If the rest of you are too lazy to notice violations, that's not my fault." "Calling us lazy is out of line," Tom said firmly, "and Mike is right. I've also noticed that Sharon's complaints often target the same residents repeatedly or cite regulations that don't actually apply to the situation. This needs to stop." I could see that the meeting was spiraling away from my specific issue, but in a good way. The board was finally acknowledging what apparently half the neighborhood already knew. Sharon was abusing her power. Marcus turned to me. "Mr. Chen, have you documented these interactions with Sharon?" "Yes," I said. "I have dates, times, and descriptions of each incident." I also want to mention that on June 8th, after Sharon confronted me about the trampoline, she called the Henderson Police Department and filed a false report claiming I had built an illegal structure without permits. Officer Martinez responded and confirmed that no permit is required for a trampoline, and that there was no code violation. He actually advised me that Sharon's behavior might constitute harassment and that I should document everything. The room went silent. Even Sharon seemed momentarily stunned. "You called the police on him for a trampoline?" Deborah asked, her voice incredulous. "Sharon, that's completely inappropriate. You wasted city resources on a personal vendetta." "It wasn't a personal vendetta," Sharon snapped. "I was concerned about safety and compliance. The officer clearly didn't understand the nuances of HOA regulations." "The officer understood that there was no city code violation, which is all that matters for police purposes," I said. "And he specifically told me that if Sharon continued this behavior, it could be considered harassment." Tom looked at the other board members. "I think we need to table the trampoline issue and discuss Sharon's conduct in an executive session. But for now, I move that we dismiss the violation against Mr. Chen. The trampoline is clearly in compliance with our regulations as written." "I second the motion," Linda said immediately. "All in favor?" Tom asked. Linda, Marcus, Deborah, and Tom all raised their hands. Sharon sat with her arms crossed, seething. "The motion passes 4-1, Tom announced. "Mr. Chen, your trampoline is not in violation." "The fine is dismissed." Relief washed over me, but I could see that Sharon wasn't done. As the meeting adjourned, she stormed out of the community center without speaking to anyone. The other board members approached me and apologized for Sharon's behavior. Tom handed me his business card and told me to call him directly if Sharon harassed me again. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. 2 days later, on June 22nd, I was at work when I got a call from my next-door neighbor, Carol, an elderly woman in her 70s who had been nothing but kind since I moved in. "David, you need to come home," she said, her voice shaking. "Sharon Whitmore is in your backyard doing something to your trampoline." I felt my blood run cold. "What do you mean she's in my backyard? How did she get in?" "I don't know, but I looked out my window and saw her. I'm calling the police right now." "Thank you, Carol. I'm on my way." I told my boss there was an emergency at home and raced back to Henderson. The drive from my office normally took 25 minutes, but I made it in 18. When I pulled up to my house, there were 2 police cars parked in front, and I could see Carol standing on her porch talking to an officer. I jumped out of my car and ran to the officer. "I'm David Chen. This is my house. What's going on?" The officer, a woman named Officer Delgado according to her name tag, gestured toward my backyard. "Your neighbor called and reported someone trespassing on your property. We found a Sharon Whitmore in your backyard attempting to disassemble your trampoline. She claims she has authority as HOA president to remove property that violates community standards." "She doesn't have that authority," I said immediately. "The HOA board voted 2 days ago to dismiss the violation. She has no legal right to be on my property, and she definitely has no right to touch my belongings." Officer Delgado nodded. "That's what we thought. My partner is speaking with her now. We need you to come back and make a statement about whether you want to press charges for trespassing and destruction of property." I followed Officer Delgado through my house and into the backyard. Sharon was standing next to the trampoline with her arms crossed, looking defiant. Several of the support poles had been disconnected, and the safety net was lying on the ground. My brand new trampoline that I had spent 2 hours assembling was half destroyed. The other officer, whose name tag read Officer Torres, turned to me. "Mr. Chen, is this your property?" "Yes, this is my house and that's my trampoline. Did you give Miss Whitmore permission to enter your property or to touch your trampoline?" "Absolutely not. I have no idea how she even got back here. My gates are locked." Officer Torres made a note in his pad. "Miss Whitmore, how did you gain entry to the backyard?" Sharon lifted her chin. "I used the side gate. As HOA president, I have the authority to inspect properties for violations." "The side gate is locked with a padlock," I said. "Did you cut the lock?" Officer Torres walked over to the side gate and examined it. "The lock has been cut with bolt cutters." He turned to Sharon. "Did you cut this lock?" For the first time, Sharon looked uncertain. I needed access to address a community violation. The homeowner was not responding to official notices. "That's a lie," I said, pulling out my phone. I responded to the notice by filing for a hearing, which occurred 2 days ago on June 20th. The board voted to dismiss the violation. "I have the minutes from the meeting if you need proof." Officer Delgado exchanged a glance with Officer Torres. "Miss Whitmore, cutting someone's lock and entering their property without permission is criminal trespassing. Additionally, you've damaged property that doesn't belong to you. Mr. Chen has every right to press charges." Sharon's defiance crumbled. "This is ridiculous. I was acting in my capacity as HOA president. This is a civil matter, not a criminal one." "You stopped making this a civil matter when you cut his lock and entered his property illegally," Officer Torres said. "HOA authority doesn't override property rights or criminal law." He turned to me. "Mr. Chen, do you want to press charges?" I looked at Sharon, who for the first time since I'd met her looked genuinely scared. Part of me wanted to show mercy. But then I thought about the 3 months of harassment, the stress she'd caused my family, the false police report, and now breaking into my property and destroying my daughter's birthday present. "Yes," I said, "I want to press charges for criminal trespassing, destruction of property, and whatever else applies here." Officer Torres pulled out his handcuffs. "Sharon Whitmore, you're under arrest for criminal trespassing and criminal mischief. You have the right to remain silent." As he read Sharon her Miranda rights and led her to the police car, I felt a surreal mixture of vindication and disbelief. I had never in my life thought I would see someone arrested in my own backyard, especially not over an HOA dispute. Carol came over after the police left with Sharon. "Oh my goodness, David. I never thought it would come to this. I've known Sharon for years and she's always been difficult, but this is beyond anything I could have imagined." "Thank you for calling me and the police," I said. "If you hadn't seen her, who knows what else she would have done." "I took photos too," Carol said, pulling out her phone. "I thought they might be useful. You can see her cutting the lock and then pulling apart the trampoline." The photos were crystal clear. Carol had captured the entire incident from her second-story window. I thanked her profusely and asked her to email me copies for evidence. That evening, I got a call from Tom Brennan, the HOA vice president. "David, I heard about what happened today. I can't even begin to apologize enough. The board is holding an emergency meeting tomorrow night to discuss Sharon's removal as president and from the board entirely. What she did is absolutely unacceptable. I appreciate that, Tom. To be honest, I'm still processing everything. We'd like you to attend the meeting if you're willing," Tom said. "The residents need to hear what happened, and we need to make sure nothing like this ever happens again." The emergency board meeting the next night was packed. Every chair in the community center was filled, and people were standing along the walls. Apparently, word had spread quickly about Sharon's arrest, and everyone wanted to know what was going to happen next. Tom called the meeting to order and explained the situation. "As many of you have heard, Sharon Whitmore was arrested yesterday for trespassing on a homeowner's property and destroying personal property. This behavior is completely contrary to everything our HOA should represent. The board has convened tonight to vote on Sharon's removal from her position as president and from the board of directors." Several residents spoke up. Mike Peterson detailed his experiences with Sharon's harassment. A woman named Jennifer Park talked about how Sharon had fined her repeatedly for having decorative flags in her garden that supposedly violated aesthetic standards, even though the regulations said nothing about garden flags. An older gentleman named Robert Kim described how Sharon had threatened to put a lien on his house because he painted his front door without pre-approval, even though the paint color was identical to the previous color. The stories went on for nearly an hour. It became painfully clear that Sharon had been terrorizing the neighborhood for years, and most people had been too intimidated or too busy to fight back. Finally, Tom called for a vote. All in favor of removing Sharon Whitmore from her position as HOA president and from the board of directors, effective immediately. All 4 remaining board members raised their hands. The motion passes unanimously. Sharon Whitmore is hereby removed from all HOA positions. Tom turned to address the room. "We will be holding elections for a new president in 30 days. In the meantime, I'll be serving as acting president. We'll also be reviewing all violation complaints filed by Sharon over the past 2 years to determine if any were frivolous or improperly enforced. If any homeowners believe they were unfairly fined, please reach out to the board with documentation, and we'll review your case." After the meeting, at least a dozen residents came up to thank me for standing up to Sharon. Several people mentioned that they wished they had been brave enough to fight back when she had targeted them. Mike Peterson bought me a beer, and we ended up sitting on my back patio while Emma played on the now-repaired trampoline with some neighborhood kids. "You did a good thing," Mike said. "Sharon needed to be stopped. She was turning this neighborhood into a nightmare." "I just wanted my daughter to have a trampoline," I said. "I never expected it to turn into all of this." The legal process moved forward over the next few weeks. I met with a prosecutor from the Henderson City Attorney's Office who explained that Sharon was being charged with criminal trespassing, criminal mischief, and filing a false police report related to the original complaint on June 8th. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Angela Reeves, told me that Sharon's attorney was trying to negotiate a plea deal. She wants to avoid jail time, Angela explained during our meeting in her office. Her attorney is arguing that she believed she had authority to access your property as HOA president and that this was all a misunderstanding. It wasn't a misunderstanding, I said firmly. She knew the board had dismissed the violation. She knew she had no authority. She cut my lock and destroyed my property because she was angry that I had challenged her. Angela nodded. I agree with you, and that's the position we're taking. However, I wanted to get your input on the plea deal. She's willing to plead guilty to criminal trespassing and criminal mischief in exchange for dropping the false report charge. She would get 2 years of probation, 200 hours of community service, a permanent restraining order preventing her from contacting you or coming within 500 feet of your property, and she would have to pay restitution for the damaged lock and the time you spent repairing the trampoline. What about jail time? I asked. With a plea deal, probably none. If we go to trial and get a conviction, she could face up to 6 months in county jail, but there's always a risk at trial. The false report charge is harder to prove because she could argue she genuinely believed there was a code violation, even if she was wrong. I thought about it for a moment. Part of me wanted to see Sharon face the maximum consequences, but another part of me just wanted this whole nightmare to be over. What do you recommend? Honestly, I think the plea deal is fair, Angela said. She'll have a criminal record, she'll be on probation for 2 years, and the restraining order will protect you from any future harassment. Plus, the community service is significant. 200 hours is nothing to sneeze at. Okay, I agreed. I'm fine with the plea deal. Sharon accepted the plea deal in late July. I attended the hearing where she stood before the judge and pleaded guilty to criminal trespassing and criminal mischief. She looked small and defeated, nothing like the confident, aggressive woman who had shown up at my house 8 weeks earlier. The judge sentenced her to 2 years of probation, 200 hours of community service, and ordered her to pay me $1,200 in restitution for the damaged lock, the cost to repair the trampoline, and my time off work. He also issued a permanent restraining order. As Sharon left the courtroom, she glanced at me once. I expected to see anger or resentment, but instead, she just looked exhausted and ashamed. I felt a pang of sympathy for her, despite everything she had put me through. Life in Meadowbrook Springs improved dramatically after Sharon's removal. Tom Brennan was elected as the new HOA president in August, and he immediately implemented several reforms. The board created a formal complaint review process that required at least 2 board members to approve any violation notice before it was sent to a homeowner. They also established an appeals process that didn't require homeowners to wait for a monthly board meeting, and created a community liaison position to help residents understand the HOA rules and resolve disputes before they escalated. The board reviewed all of Sharon's violation complaints from the previous 2 years and discovered that she had filed over 300 complaints, which was 10 times more than all other board members combined. They reversed 47 fines that had been improperly assessed and issued refund checks to the affected homeowners. In September, the board formally updated the HOA handbook to clarify several ambiguous regulations. The recreational equipment section was rewritten to specifically list prohibited items and to clearly state that equipment in fenced backyards not visible from the street was generally permitted. They also added protections against harassment and abuse of authority by board members. Emma absolutely loved her trampoline. She and her friends played on it almost every day after school. Our house became the neighborhood gathering spot, and I got to know many of my neighbors much better than I probably would have otherwise. The Petersons, the Parks, the Kims, and Carol all became good friends. We started having monthly neighborhood barbecues where everyone would bring food, and the kids would play while the adults socialized. In October, I ran into Patricia, the HOA administrator, at the grocery store. She told me that Sharon had moved out of Meadowbrook Springs entirely. Apparently, the criminal conviction and the neighborhood backlash had been too much for her. She sold her house and moved to Arizona to live with her sister. "I feel bad for her in a way," Patricia said. "I think she was just lonely, and controlling the HOA was the only thing that made her feel important, but she took it way too far." I agreed. Looking back on the whole experience, I realized that Sharon probably wasn't an evil person, just a deeply unhappy one who had used her position to try to control her environment and feel powerful. It didn't excuse her behavior, but it made me understand it a little better. In December, the HOA held its annual holiday party at the community center. It was the first one I had attended, and I was surprised by how much fun it was. The new board had worked hard to rebuild trust and create a sense of community rather than fear and resentment. Kids played games while adults ate and chatted. There was a white elephant gift exchange and a talent show where Emma performed a gymnastics routine that incorporated moves she had learned on her trampoline. Tom gave a short speech near the end of the night. This year has been challenging for Meadowbrook Springs, but it's also brought us closer together as a community. We've learned that HOA rules exist to serve residents, not to burden them. We've learned that standing up for what's right matters, even when it's difficult. And we've been reminded that we're all neighbors first and foremost. I want to especially thank David Chen for his courage in challenging an unjust situation, and for helping us recognize problems that needed to be addressed. Everyone applauded, and I felt my face turn red. Emma squeezed my hand and whispered, "I'm proud of you, Dad." As we drove home that night, with Emma chattering excitedly about the party in the backseat, I reflected on the past 6 months. It had started with such a simple thing: buying a trampoline for my daughter's birthday. I never could have imagined it would lead to arrests, board meetings, court hearings, and a complete transformation of our HOA. But I was glad it had happened. Not glad about the stress or the conflict, but glad that I had stood up for myself and my family. Glad that other residents had found the courage to speak up about their own experiences. Glad that the neighborhood was now a better place to live because people had been willing to fight for change. The trampoline still sits in my backyard, used regularly by Emma and her friends. Every time I look at it, I remember the whole crazy saga. It's become a symbol of something larger than just a piece of recreational equipment. It represents the importance of knowing your rights, standing up to bullies, and refusing to be intimidated by people who abuse their authority. In January, almost exactly 7 months after the whole incident began, I received an unexpected letter in the mail. It was from Sharon. I hesitated before opening it, unsure if I wanted to engage with her at all given the restraining order and everything that had happened. But curiosity got the better of me. The letter was handwritten on plain stationery. It read, "Dear David, I know I'm not supposed to contact you, and I'm sorry if this letter violates the restraining order. I'm sending it anyway because I need to say this. I'm sorry for everything I put you through. I'm sorry for harassing you, for filing false reports, for breaking into your property, and for destroying your daughter's birthday present. There's no excuse for my behavior. I was wrong, and I let my need for control turn me into someone I don't recognize. Therapy has helped me see that I was using the HOA to fill a void in my life after my husband died. I thought if I could create a perfect neighborhood, I could feel some sense of order and purpose. Instead, I just made everyone miserable, including myself. You had every right to press charges, and I deserved the consequences. I hope you and Emma are doing well. I hope the neighborhood is thriving without my interference. I hope someday you might be able to forgive me, though I'll understand if you can't. Sincerely, Sharon. I read the letter twice, feeling a complicated mix of emotions. I was still angry about what she had done, but I also felt genuine sadness for her. Losing a spouse and then losing yourself in the aftermath was something I could understand on some level. My wife, Emma's mother, had died from cancer when Emma was 4 years old. That grief had nearly destroyed me. The difference was that I had recognized I needed help and had gotten therapy and support. Sharon had apparently tried to manage her grief and loneliness by controlling everything around her, and it had led to disaster. I showed the letter to Angela Reeves, the prosecutor, who confirmed that the letter technically violated the restraining order but said she wouldn't pursue any action unless I wanted her to. I told her I didn't. Some things were more important than legal technicalities. I never responded to Sharon's letter, but I did forgive her, at least in my own heart. Carrying around anger and resentment would only hurt me and Emma, and we had already spent too much energy on the situation. It was time to move forward. By the spring, life in Meadowbrook Springs had fully returned to normal, or rather, to a new and better normal. The HOA functioned the way it was supposed to, maintaining common areas, enforcing reasonable rules fairly and consistently, and fostering a sense of community. There were no more harassment campaigns, no more frivolous fines, no more intimidation tactics. Emma thrived in the neighborhood. She made friends easily, did well in school, and spent countless hours on her trampoline perfecting flips and tricks. She asked me once why that lady had been so mean about the trampoline, and I explained to her in age-appropriate terms that sometimes people make bad choices when they're hurting inside, but that didn't make their behavior okay. "Did she say sorry?" Emma asked. "Yes, she did." "Good, you should always say sorry when you hurt someone." The wisdom of 8-year-olds never ceased to amaze me. In April, I was elected to the HOA board as a member at large. I had never planned to get involved in HOA politics, but after everything that had happened, I felt a responsibility to help ensure the association continued on its new, healthier path. My first initiative as a board member was to create a welcome packet for new residents that clearly explained the HOA rules in plain language and provided contact information for each board member. We wanted people moving into Meadowbrook Springs to feel welcomed and supported, not threatened and scrutinized. The neighborhood continued to grow and improve. Property values actually increased after Sharon left, disproving her constant claims that minor violations would destroy home prices. Turns out that people were more interested in living in a community with friendly neighbors and reasonable rules than in a police state run by a tyrant with a measuring tape and a chip on her shoulder. Mike Peterson and I became close friends. Our daughters were in the same grade and had become best friends themselves. We started a neighborhood watch program that focused on actual safety concerns rather than HOA rule enforcement. We also organized a community garden in one of the common areas, which became a popular gathering spot for residents who enjoyed gardening. Looking back on the entire experience now, more than a year after it all began, I'm grateful for several things. I'm grateful that I had the courage to stand up to Sharon instead of just removing the trampoline to avoid conflict. I'm grateful for neighbors like Carol, Mike, and others who supported me and spoke up about their own experiences. I'm grateful for police officers like Martinez, Delgado, and Torres who took the situation seriously and treated it as the harassment and criminal behavior it was. I'm grateful for a prosecutor like Angela Reeves who pursued justice. And I'm grateful for a community that was willing to acknowledge problems and make meaningful changes. But most of all, I'm grateful for Emma. Watching her play on that trampoline, hearing her laughter echo through our backyard, seeing her confidence grow as she masters new tricks and hosts her friends, that's what this was all about. That trampoline represented her happiness, her childhood, her ability to make friends and feel at home in a new place. No HOA president, no matter how aggressive or unreasonable, had the right to take that away from her. The trampoline incident taught me valuable lessons about standing up for yourself, understanding your rights, documenting everything, and refusing to be bullied by people in positions of authority who abuse their power. It taught me that sometimes conflict is necessary, and that avoiding confrontation at all costs isn't the same as keeping the peace. It taught me that communities are stronger when people are willing to speak up about injustice, even when it's uncomfortable. On a warm evening in May, I stood on my back patio watching Emma and 5 of her friends bouncing on the trampoline. The sun was setting over the Nevada mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. I could hear laughter and the rhythmic sound of feet hitting the trampoline mat. Carol was in her backyard, watering her garden. The Petersons were grilling in their yard 3 houses down, and I could smell the charcoal smoke drifting through the neighborhood. This was what a community should feel like: peaceful, friendly, supportive. Not perfect, because no place is perfect, but healthy and functional. The fact that it had taken a confrontation, an arrest, and a complete transformation of HOA leadership to get here was unfortunate, but the end result was worth it. Emma called out to me from the trampoline. "Dad, watch this." She launched into a sequence of flips and jumps that she had been practicing for weeks. I watched with my heart in my throat, terrified she might fall, but also proud of her fearlessness and determination. She stuck the landing and threw her arms up in triumph. Her friends cheered and applauded. I clapped and whistled, and Emma beamed with pride. That trampoline, the same one that Sharon Whitmore had tried so hard to remove, the same one that had sparked a neighborhood revolution, stood as a testament to something important: that ordinary people have the power to stand up against unreasonable authority, that homes should be places where families can live and children can play without fear of arbitrary rules enforced by petty tyrants, and that communities thrive when they're built on mutual respect rather than intimidation and control. As darkness fell and I called Emma inside for dinner, I took one last look at the trampoline sitting in our backyard, safely enclosed by the privacy fence that had made Sharon's entire argument moot from the very beginning. It was just a trampoline, a simple piece of recreational equipment that thousands of families across America had in their yards. But for us, for our neighborhood, for this moment in time, it had been so much more. It had been a line in the sand. It had been a catalyst for change. It had been proof that doing the right thing, even when it's difficult, matters. And most importantly, it had been exactly what I intended it to be from the very start. A birthday present that brought joy to my daughter and created countless happy memories in our new home. Sharon Whitmore had tried to take that away. She had failed. And in her failure, she had accidentally helped create something better than what existed before. A neighborhood where people looked out for each other, where rules served the residents instead of the other way around, and where a man could buy his daughter a trampoline without worrying about harassment from an overzealous HOA president. Sometimes the smallest acts of resistance lead to the biggest changes. Sometimes standing up for a trampoline means standing up for something much larger. And sometimes the best revenge against bullies and tyrants isn't revenge at all, but simply living well, raising happy kids, and building communities based on kindness and respect rather than fear and control. The trampoline still stands in my backyard today. Emma still uses it regularly, though as she gets older, she spends less time bouncing and more time sitting on it with her friends, talking about school and books and whatever else 11-year-olds talk about these days. Eventually, she'll outgrow it completely, and it will sit unused until I finally disassemble it and haul it away. But I'll never forget what that trampoline represented during those turbulent months in 2025. I'll never forget the HOA Karen who reported it, the regulations she tried to twist to support her baseless complaint, the officer who told me she was harassing me, and the journey from that first confrontation to the final resolution. It's a story I'll probably tell Emma when she's older, when she can fully appreciate the absurdity and the importance of what happened. It's a story about standing up for what's right, about the dangers of unchecked authority, and about the resilience of communities that refuse to be bullied. And it all started with one simple decision. I wanted to buy my daughter a trampoline for her birthday. Sharon Whitmore thought she could stop me. She was wrong.